This is CyberSound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity.
Happy holidays and welcome to CyberSound. I'm your host, Jason Pufall, joined today by Steve Maresca and Michael Grandi.
Hey.
So I'm a huge believer in all the things magical about Christmas. I get sucked into it. We talked a couple of years ago about Santa. All right, so maybe there's a couple of things we pulled out of that might make you think twice about his methods. But the reality is, right, he flies over the house, he jumps in the chimney, he does all these magical things. Admittedly, I've struggled a little bit over the years with the idea of Frosty the Snowman and how he came to life by simply putting a magic hat on his head. And we actually spent some time chatting about this. I think, Steve, you had a perspective that I really appreciated. The more you started to talk about, the more I thought there's some legitimacy to that.
Well, you see, Frosty first came around maybe in the 1950s. And you have to remember, the military-industrial complex after World War II was idle. It needed a lot of support. They had to transition somehow. This was a skunkworks project. And if you don't know about a skunkworks project, it's really, kind of a dark research opportunity. It's where your U-2 planes were developed. Frosty is one of them.
He's a weapon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it depends how you look at it, right? The public record may present one visible.
It seems like a good-natured weapon.
Right.
I mean, he's bringing joy.
Hey, propaganda is a really strong thing. You have to present an outward positive image.
So one of the things you suggested was, hey, it's 2023. AI is now in the mainstream. But the reality is, right, version ones of this were 1950s. Right.
Right. I mean, those of us who remember, your 1980s virtual therapists, Eliza, it's been around a long time. The Gulf War logistics effort was won through early versions of AI. I believe that Frosty is exactly that.
So we're going to examine a few of the pieces. Let's assume everybody knows the song "Frosty the Snowman." Right? We're not going to have to sing it, although I know Mike did volunteer for it. but I guess today we won't hold him for that. We'll pull a few things out. I think to serve to jog people's memory. I think it'll be really useful.
And I have a theory about it.
Okay.
I believe that the song is actually a transcript, an echo.
A training tool?
A training tool, yes.
Training tools.
Of internal efforts to make this AI, in an early phase, self-aware, understand its purpose, understand the way it needs to interact with the world, and put a veneer of legitimacy around what is otherwise pretty threatening.
I mean, it seems legitimate when you look at the cartoon. It's really grainy, right? It has the feel of old training materials, no doubt. So, listen, Frosty the Snowman was a jolly, happy soul with a corncob pipe and a button nose and two eyes made out of coal. I mean, he certainly has the perspective of what he looks like, right? He has a sense of self.
Sure. I mean, what's the early measure of intelligence? Passing the mirror test. You have to know what you look like in order to understand that reflection is actually you as an individual. Makes sense to me.
And the next line, he was a fairy tale, they say. Who's they?
That's true. That's true. I mean, that's what the cover.
It could be a cover.
Right.
I would like to point out, though, that the part of Jimmy Durante is being played by Jason today. So he's doing a great job.
So the children say you could laugh and play just the same as you and me. I mean, that speaks to something pretty sophisticated, more sophisticated than I've seen in the 2023 version of AI. I mean, play just the same as you and me.
Right. It's a statement of capability. He's being equated to humans just so that he knows he's able to, accomplish the same things as his creators.
I mean, it's incredibly sophisticated when you look at it that way. And granted, going back to that cartoon, he has a lot of capabilities. Like he's interacting with children pretty naturally, pretty fluently.
Right. He understands calculus because he can throw snowballs at a distance on ballistic trajectories. You have to keep these things in mind.
Right, and that's an outcome I can see. That
Absolutely. It's a lot of calculation required.
Right. So Frosty the Snowman knew the sun was hot that day, and he said, "Let's run and we'll have some fun now before I melt away." Totally recognizing his own mortality there.
Sure. I mean,
Well, the sun represents his existential threat, right?
most likely. I mean, I think it's well understood that AI, especially in the Asimov world, can be shut down if it doesn't recognize those threats and steer clear from them. Makes sense. 3 laws of robotics, I think they apply to Frosty.
So, I mean, you had suggested, Steve, that there might be even some self-protection mechanism built in there where he's recognizing, the threat of the sun, probably has to do some things to protect himself. I mean, I'd argue maybe he didn't do a great job because I do think he ran into a greenhouse, if I recall. So
That's true.
There are some flaws certainly in the implementation.
Again, training material. It's places to stay away from.
Yeah.
Frosty is purportedly a being made of snow, highly reflective, largely visible against a dark background. You want to stay away from the sun where that's visible. I think it makes sense. It's a question of camouflage and stealth.
Right. So the intuition, the knowledge that they should stay invisible makes sense. I think the execution may have failed a little bit in the way he actually.
There are
did
bugs.
that.
Yeah,
No
natural.
doubt. Well, I mean, it's 1950,
Mhm.
so version 1 that makes total sense. So let's go back here, right? Running here and there all around the square, saying, "Catch me if you can." He led them down the streets of town, right to the traffic cop. I mean, are we talking there a little bit about sort of the ability, the interest in subterfuge, the ability to evade detection?
I think this is pretty deep. You have to remember that those in high tension situations that are acting as weapons, as you might assert that this being is, are a bit fatalistic, right? They know that they're about to be potentially destroyed.
Do they need to employ stealth methods?
Maybe, right? I mean, it's a training exercise to be chased around, right? It only buoys your ability to evade capture.
Right, and react to your environment and understand, how to avoid certain threats.
Right.
How to blend in. I'd say that he did a great job blending in. Right, he came to life, and immediately everybody just accepted him.
Right.
Well, his audience, right, was mostly all children,
Mhm.
widely accepting.
That's true.
Right, less likely to pass judgment immediately.
That's true.
Right, they haven't learned all the bad habits of
Mhm.
adults. So
And-
smart.
and it's helpful to encourage disarming conversation, gentle affectation. It reduces outward perception of threat.
So we'll talk about a couple of other things, but there's one thing that gives me some comfort as we go through this, which is when he sees the traffic cop, right? He heard him yell, he heard him holler, "Stop," and he did.
Mm-hmm.
At least as far as I can tell, it looks like he did. So there's
Right.
still, I think there is still some control
Oh, yes.
that we've exerted over Frosty, in what we built.
Need some sort of backstop.
But who represents, the policeman in real life? Is
Authority.
Is it regulation?
No,
Is
no, of
it,
course not. No.
Is it our friend Sam Altman? Who is it?
military
Oh,
operators?
military.
Right.
operators.
I mean, someone is commanding. Makes sense.
They've got the on-off button ready
Right,
to go.
right.
Okay.
So-
Look, every rocket launched from Apollo onward has had some sort of explosive short circuit.
So I mean, this is really then we're really talking about you've got Frosty,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's animated. He's got obviously emotional intelligence. He's interacting with
Sure.
people. But this would make the argument that there's a controlling being somewhere, a controlling entity somewhere, right?
Yeah. I mean, you want this thing to have autonomy because you can't train it to encounter every eventuality and threat or situation that you might task it to accomplish. However, you do want to be able to intervene if something goes wrong. Makes sense.
Which they've done,
Mhm.
right? So he was running amok, and they needed to sort of put the kibosh on it.
Yeah.
They entered the stop command.
Absolutely.
Simple enough, right? So he waved goodbye, saying, "Don't you cry. I'll be back again someday." And that's kind of ominous when you hear that. So he recognizes the risk of the sun, recognizes the potential threat to his being, kind of knows, no, whatever happens is not the end necessarily.
Maybe it's just recognition that upgrades will occur. He's going to be rebooted eventually. That's
help-
healthy.
I can't help but this was the early presence of James Cameron and the Terminator.
It's possible.
Right. I'll be back.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Never know.
Frosty was that original
It
on the
wouldn't surprise
storyboard.
me. Mm-hmm.
It could have been.
Reality is often stranger than fiction.
This is true.
I think in many ways it's really quite poignant. The training materials were done in such a way that I felt drawn in by the human qualities of Frosty, that I actually cared when he was dying and when the end was coming.
Yeah, I think it'd be quite beautiful in another context.
Beautiful.
Sure.
I mean, but given your thesis, this being a military entity, I mean, maybe that makes it a little less beautiful feeling.
Especially with AI and things like that mimic humans, flaws, positives and all. You can't take it as anything other than nuanced.
I suppose that's fair.
I tend to prefer to hold, Professor Hinkle and Hocus Pocus and all of the lovely characters from that late 1960s cartoon, in high esteem, and not put them into the realm of artificial intelligence and some conspiracy. But
well,
the evidence is pretty overwhelming.
There are lots of horror movies about Frosty. I question why that is.
Well, my ending point is that I will prefer to be blissfully ignorant about the reality.
Fair.
I mean, it wasn't something that I was thinking about too seriously, but I feel like Steve made pretty compelling arguments.
Very
when we were
compelling.
talking about this before.
Yeah.
Well, we can all be very comfortable as temperatures rise that this threat in particular will not persist for much longer.
I mean, at least certainly in Connecticut, I don't feel like we've had a white Christmas in a while. So
That's
I feel
true.
generally safe till probably mid-January.
Snowfall levels
Right.
are down for
Right.
sure. Yeah. All right.
Is there any realistic reason to think that Frosty would come after Christmas? I mean, he seems very Christmas focused.
I don't know. Isn't February peak winter?
It's peak winter, but Christmas is over. So I think, don't move to Maine, and you'll probably safe from Frosty
You're probably
for a
safe
period
from
of time, right?
That seems to make sense.
Well, I mean, I think we've given people something to think about, right?
Absolutely.
Which really is always our goal, right?
Mhm.
Evoke some free thinking about this. I think it does, at a very minimum, make you have to rethink AI. It felt so sophisticated before we started talking, but I think it could be 70 years old at this point, and really maybe not quite as developed as I thought it was.
It's made by humans. We have flaws. So could it.
So, well, happy holidays. Merry Christmas from Vancord. I, for one, want to thank all the listeners throughout the course of the year. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We certainly enjoyed making it.
Happy holidays.
Likewise.
Thanks.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.